Hello everyone and welcome to this session which is entitled Exotic Diseases that Threaten the UK and May be Encountered when Travelling. Now potentially this is an extremely long list and what I've done is whittle it down to 4 diseases based on the likelihood and severity. The first is West Nile fever. West Nile fever is a neurological disease caused by infection with West Nile virus, and the clinical signs include fevers, possibly difficulty eating, and in particular muscle tremors, which can be very subtle and affect maybe only the muzzle and the face and just be seen as little twitches and tics, and these can then become very generalized and present as tremors and twitches all over the body, weakness, which may seem like lameness, wobbliness, tripping and stumbling, collapse, and then occasionally progressing to paralysis, coma and death. Though it is important to point out that most cases of West Nile virus infection will recover. The disease is vector-borne and is spread by mosquito bites, not from horse to horse. Normally, the virus circulates between mosquitoes and birds, and occasionally what happens is that one of those mosquitoes, more by sort of accident than anything, will bite a horse or even a human and then spread the virus there and cause disease. But that infected horse does not then cause an outbreak, does not spread the disease onwards to other horses or even to other people, which is important. Disease occurs throughout Northern America, Southern and Eastern Europe, Russia, Africa and parts of Asia. The virus is not present in the UK and is therefore notifiable, but it is spreading through mainland Europe and probably will come to the UK at some point in the future because of climate change. It's particularly topical now as a case was confirmed in the UK in November this year. That horse had recently travelled from Spain and almost certainly was infected in Spain and then had clinical signs on return and based on what I've already said could not act as a source of disease and spread. Vaccines are available in the UK, and there's a strong recommendation that horses travelling to countries where West Nile virus is endemic or common, such as Southern and Eastern Europe and the Americas, have a vaccine. The necessity of vaccinating horses in the UK that don't travel outside, as the disease is not present here, is more of a subject for debate. Prevention when horses are travelling is based on avoiding mosquito bites, so keeping the horses stabled, particularly during dawn and dusk when there's more mosquitoes around, and using repellents, ideally something containing DEET, although ideally not higher than 20 or 25%, as this can cause irritation in some horses. But it is quite an effective repellent for mosquitoes. And then be on the lookout for the classic clinical signs of muscle tremors and twitches in the days to weeks after travel, and contact a vet if you have any concerns. The next disease we're going to look at is equine infectious anemia, which is caused by infection with a virus, equine infectious anemia virus. And this results in either an acute form where there is fever, elevated breathing rate, abnormal bleeding, dullness, pale gums, wobbliness, weight loss and swelling of the lower limbs and abdomen, or potentially a chronic form, which can go on for weeks to months with recurrent signs, but is less important in terms of what you look out for after your event. Spread is mostly indirect via in particular, blood spread on the larger biting flies, so your tabanid stable flies, which have big biting mouth parts that slash the skin, cause a lot of bleeding. They get blood on there, and then they fly to another horse and do the same thing, and they transmit the spread that way. There's also spread on contaminated equipment, such as dental equipment, needles if they're shared, or via blood products. So there's definitely been outbreaks associated with blood doping. In theory, sexual contact and spread from mares to foals occurs, but is less of a significance. The disease is notifiable in the UK and has been eradicated, and the last outbreak occurred in 2012, and this was because of a government scheme which enabled the eradication to occur. It is present worldwide and is endemic in parts of Europe, in particular Italy and Romania, and so these represent the highest risk areas for horses travelling, and potentially the horses can then spread the disease back to other parts of Europe, including the UK. Prevention is by biosecurity at competitions, no sharing of equipment in the mouth, no sharing of needles or uses of blood doping or unregistered biological products, obviously, and trying to keep fly control as much as possible. There isn't a vaccine, but just be on alert for the clinical signs in horses returning from endemic regions, especially if they've been there during the seasons where there's a lot of flies, sort of during the summer months. And importantly, the clinical signs could occur for weeks to months after. Piroplasmosis is a tick-borne disease caused by intracellular protozoan parasites, Babesia or Theileria. It's vector-borne again and is spread by the ticks. There's an acute form where you see fever, anaemia, pale gums, lethargy, dark red urine, maybe swelling of the lower limbs, a high heart rate, breathing rate, and potentially death. And this is a form that's most likely to be detected on return from travel abroad. Again, similar to infectious anemia, there's a chronic form, but this again is something that you'll notice in the weeks to months afterwards. Piroplasmosis is endemic in mainland Europe, Asia, Africa, South and Central America, and parts of the USA, although it's officially eradicated from the USA and there's a lot of very strict control there. Currently, we don't believe it's present in the UK, but there is suspicion it could be circulating in small areas. And if there are any signs of hemolytic anemia seen in horses returning from travel, so any of those clinical signs, or if there's tick infestation noticed, then please contact your vet to discuss treatments. This is based on a course of injections and could be gone into in more detail if it were to occur. The final disease is African horse sickness, which is an infectious vector-borne viral disease of horses, which is transmitted by Culicoides midges. So these are the classic biting midges that we encounter in the UK. The clinical signs vary, but in horses that are not from endemic areas are likely to be very severe and can include fever, sometimes rapidly fatal respiratory signs, heart failure, colic, and swelling of the head and neck. African horse sickness is endemic in sub-Saharan Africa, and the closest it's been to the UK is Spain. But outbreaks can occur very suddenly, and in 2020 there was the first ever outbreak in Southeast Asia, and this was an example of how the disease can suddenly spread from where it's usually established. Now, luckily, the OAE travel testing and regulations are very effective in controlling the disease, and diseases are officially declared as free of infection. There is a vaccine available, but it's not allowed to be used outside the endemic areas and under OAE rules. What I would say is that owners aren't going to be travelling to endemic regions. You're not going to be taking your horses really to endemic regions. And if you are, then there's very, very strict travel and quarantine to get the horse back to the UK. But still always monitor closely for signs of disease and contact a vet if you have any concerns.